Well, good morning. Welcome back to our study of the book of Ruth. We're only a couple weeks in, really, only one total into the book. But so far, we've discussed several important factors related to the book. The first was, if you remember, the importance of covenant. That God had made covenantal promises to Adam and Eve in the garden. One day, they'd have a son that would bless the nations. One day, he makes a covenant promise to Abram that Abram is going to be the father of that blessed one. One day his descendants will also inherit the land. There'll be so many you can't count them. And that those who bless them will be blessed and those who curse them will be cursed. The covenant promises continue to be passed down from generation to generation as we've looked for the son who would one day become the Redeemer. As we began the book of Ruth, we found a family led by the father Elimelech who was abandoning the covenantal promise of the land because of famine. Their physical circumstances drove them to make a decision to leave the land, in essence, symbolically to leave the relationship with God, and proceed to the land of Moab, distant cousins through Abraham's nephew Lot. And there they settled in. His two sons married Moabite women, and in the process, both he and the sons pass away, leaving the women basically widowed, abandoned, without hope. At that point, Naomi, the wife of Elimelech, made the decision that she was going to return home, defeated, but it was better to be at home than in a foreign land alone. She told her two daughter-in-laws to go home. One, Orpah, chose to return to her family in the hopes that she might one day be able to get married and live a normal, comfortable, peaceful life. Ruth, on the other hand, made the pronouncement that perhaps stands out amongst so many in the Bible. She, looking at Naomi, said, "No, I will not go home. Wherever you go, I'll go. Wherever you are, I will be. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." And in essence, it was, as you remember, as I said, essentially the first formal proclamation of faith by a Gentile in the Old Testament. Some point to Rahab and her belief and understanding that the people were going to come and invade Jericho, and she trusted them to rescue her. But it's not so much an explicit statement of faith as it is a please don't destroy us when you invade the city. Ruth is very clearly about the Gentile people coming into the covenant by way of God's mercy and grace. And so at the end of chapter 1, Naomi and Ruth have returned to Bethlehem, the house of bread, where there's finally once again bread. Yet, two women, two widows, one whose husband had abandoned the covenant, and the other, a Moabite, an outsider, aren't going to enjoy the prosperity of the times as much as others around them. That's where chapter 2 begins for us this day. So look, if you will, chapter 2, let's start in verse 1, and let's look at the first paragraph, and as time permits, we might consider the second paragraph. Now, favorite Old Testament term, it connects the passage that ended in chapter 1 with this one. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's. He's a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she set out and went, and she gleaned in the field after the reapers. She happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. And he said to his reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after your reapers.' So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest." Now remember, assume you've never read this book before. Assume this is your first hearing of the story of Ruth. You don't know the outcome, so you're learning as the author shares information with you. And the author is very carefully deciding, choosing what to tell us and what he's going to withhold for later for dramatic effect. In essence, the book reads like a 4-act play. Act 1 took place in the land of Moab. Now Act 2 comes in here. We're introduced to a new character, Boaz, and the author is telling us just enough. So we learn a little bit about Boaz, we learn a lot more about Ruth, and we're going to ultimately find out a lot more about God. And so here we are in chapter 2, verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's. And so Elimelech has looked very poorly in this book, right? But he has a man in his family, a relative. He's a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech. Now, worthy here is a word often chosen in the Old Testament to describe a man of a great stature, a warrior who's been successful. And so this man that we don't have his name yet, we'll get in just a moment, this man who's a relative of Elimelech is a man of great stature in the community. He's somebody. He's somebody important. Now we get his name. His name was Boaz. Then Ruth, the Moabite, and notice the author keeps reminding us, she is an outsider. She is an outsider. She is, by all appearances, outside the covenant. Ruth, the Moabite. She takes the initiative. She wants to care for her mother-in-law just as she promised. Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go to the field. Let me go out into the fields, harvest, and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. So let me go out and try to bring home some food for us. Now, it may be worth bearing a reminder here. This idea of gleaning comes from the book of Leviticus. It is one of the ways in which God has chosen to provide for the orphans, the widows, the homeless in our society. We are to be amongst benevolent people doing ministries of mercy for those in need. God's provided for it in the Old Testament with gleaning. In the case of gleaning, they were to go into the field and follow the workers, not to go before them, not to go steal food. There's no call here for situational ethics where you steal because it's the only thing you can do. You go and you follow the workers through the field. As they go, if they drop grain on the ground, they're commanded not to pick it up, to let the people who are coming behind do so for themselves. Not only does that provide food for the homeless or for those who are destitute, it also allows them a measure of, if you will, encouragement, because they're not taking handouts, they're working for and earning their way. Many places around the world, they've begun to complain about some of our missionary activities from the West, because our approach is to send money, send stuff, just keep giving these people things. And what they're begging us to do is come show them how they successfully can provide for themselves and not be dependent, not to be, if you will, at the bottom of the food chain, always begging for help. And so gleaning allows for the people who are in trouble to get to what they need, but to do it so in such a way that is both a recognition of the grace of the owner, but also the result of the work of the one who needs. And so she wants to go to a field, whoever will let her do it, and collect food. And Naomi says to her in verse 2, go. So, by God's providence, Ruth set out. She went and she gleaned in the field after the reapers. She picked a field where they're working, is the picture we get. And she happened, providence, not coincident, God working the circumstances out perfectly, she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And so, by God's providence, she's where she needs to be with a family member who has a responsibility to help provide and take care of his relatives. And behold, verse 4 begins, look, he says, Boaz came from Bethlehem. Did he just happen to show up? Or again, is God at work behind the scenes? And when he gets there and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you, blessing. They answered, the Lord bless you. So he's well liked and respected by those working his field. Then Boaz said to the young man who was in charge of the reapers, his foreman, whose young woman is this? He notices there's a new person who is gleaning, one he's not seen before. And the servant who was in charge responds to him, she is, here again, the young Moabite woman. Here's this outsider. She's here. She came back with Naomi. This is the daughter-in-law. And they've come from the land of Moab. So notice, again, she's the outsider. She's outside the covenant. But just as we've seen now about Boaz's character, that he's a man who's worthy, Naomi has brought home with her a daughter-in-law, Ruth, and Ruth is proving to be more than worthy. She voluntarily goes to the field to gather food. Her reputation is already about town. Not only that she is a Moabite, but she's there taking care of Naomi. This woman said to me in verse 7, please let me glean and gather amongst the sheaves after the reapers. She doesn't just go in and take it on herself to just start following the workers around. She goes and she seeks permission. Again, a woman of high character. And so she came, the foreman continues. And she has continued from early morning when the reaping began in the early day. She's continued even till now. Whatever time of the day it is, she's worked all day at this, except for a short rest. And so not only is she polite, not only is she asking for permission, She's a hard worker. She's been at it all day long, except for a short rest. So now all the main characters in place. Elimelech is dead, but his family connections through the covenant are important. Naomi comes home broken. Ruth has come with her, the outsider who's taking care of her mother-in-law. And now we've been introduced to Boaz, a wealthy, influential man of importance. And all these paths are about to cross in a way that changes their lives, in a way that changes the course of history, and in a way that God keeps his covenant.